We ought to be able to know, as a society, as a people, whether the president's private interests influence his public decision-making. And we cannot know that when he is so unwilling to be transparent with the American people.
Congressman Kildee, who serves on the Ways and Means Committee, explaining why his panel is asking the IRS to provide 6 years of Donald Trump's tax returns. They're looking for his personal returns and also some from his business. Now, of course, the president says he's not inclined to cooperate. Shocker. The push for the tax returns, all part of the new offensive from House Democrats. They're ramping up probes and they're sending out subpoenas. Well, join me now to discuss that and more, ABC News political director Rick Klein. All right, Rick, let's take a look at the different players on the Hill right now and try and take us behind the scenes, starting with the Democrats. Clearly, they're not waiting, and they're moving ahead here with a bunch of subpoenas and a bunch of probes. Are they worried in the rank and file that some may be moving too fast and have different agendas than the party as a whole in 2020, or is the party firmly behind this kind of strategy?
Yeah, it was a remarkable confluence of events that had a couple of different committees pressing for different disclosure, really all in the same couple of hours. And I think the push for the tax returns, the push for the Mueller report, it all adds up to increased scrutiny on this White House. And it sets up some pretty big political battles. And I think in all of those battles, Richard, you're right to point out, there's a danger there for overreach. Do the Democrats push a little too far beyond where the public wants to go, beyond where the facts are likely to lead them? That is undeniably a danger for them.
But is the Speaker on board with all this fully, or is this being driven by the left portion of the party?
Well, I think the Speaker actually has shown some pretty good discretion and hesitance in kind of reining her members in. There were some people that wanted to ask for the tax returns like 3 months ago, wanted to start subpoenaing Mueller and haul him before the Hill already. So I think she has actually done her best to hold things at bay a little bit. The impeachment talk really has died down almost entirely. There's no realistic talk of that anymore. But I do think she has allowed her committees to start doing their work. That means digging in. That means picking your battles. And that means, in some areas, asking for documents, asking for testimony that the White House is not prepared to give.
Now we go to the other side of the aisle, and I think we need a neck brace for Republicans when it relates to shutting down the border, making health care an issue this year. What have you heard as to the genesis? Did they even know the president was going to go there saying that he wanted to repeal Obamacare? Because it seemed that McConnell was like, fine, then you do it here, because I don't know where you're coming from that we have a replacement plan, nor do we want to litigate this before as we get ready for 2020.
No, this was not part of a grand Republican plan. They're not comfortable with it. They didn't want it. They continue to urge the president to reconsider it. And I think that's why McConnell said right afterward, hey, you know, if Pelosi and Trump want to come up with something, I'm glad to take a look at it. That means not on my watch. I am not dealing with it. And I think that has been the prevailing Republican view. They feel like health care in particular, asked and answered, not an issue. The president has made clear he wants to make that squarely an issue in 2020. Actually, he's saying you'll see the plan after the election, so you better vote for Republicans. I don't know if that's tenable, and I do know for a fact that's not how Republicans want to fight the congressional or the presidential race next year.
The president clearly thinks that immigration is a big reason why he was elected, and he thinks it's a winning political issue. Republicans did not like the idea, or at least a lot of them didn't, of shutting the whole border down for all the economic consequences. So the president backs off with this imaginary that Mexico gave me everything I wanted here, so now we don't have a problem at the border. And now he says he's going to give them 1 year just a little bit ago. Does the party know what the president really wants, and do they think he'll really follow through? It's getting to the point where it's like the boy who cried wolf.
Well, I think so many Republicans have said something similar, at least to me. Focus on what he does and not what he says. They recognize that he is going to ramble and contradict and circumvent and short-circuit a whole lot of very careful political calculations. They focus on what's actually being done. In this case, a lot of saber-rattling, but it's almost expected at this point. The president says, I'm shutting down the border. It's actually not happening. You got to dial that back and recognize what it means. So it doesn't appear that's going to happen. We'll see. He'll be at the border later in the week. Does he pull the trigger on something bigger? Do they dial it back? He's being told by a lot of people in his party this is a potential economic disaster that they want to avoid.
Finally, I'm curious your take on the story both the Times and the Washington Post broke in terms of that the Mueller team is not too happy with Mr. Barr and his version of their report. People inside on the Hill, you would think, given the the discipline and the messaging discipline or lack thereof that Mueller and team have had here for the better part of a year, that this story would go out the way it was, with reportedly multiple prosecutors in their team saying the same thing. Where do Democrats and Republicans feel now? Because Republicans have gone on a limb to protect the president. Conversely, Democrats have bitten their tongue because they said the report wasn't what they thought. How do you think this plays out in the next 48, 72 hours?
Well, we have to see the report. We're going to see most of it at some point. But this is the first suggestion we've seen, at least emerging publicly, that the Barr summary of the report is not the full story. We always knew it was going to be more complicated. But if there's a lot more in there, it may change perceptions of the report. You know, a week and a half ago, when Barr's summary came out, everyone immediately was saying, well, this backs up the president. It seems to exonerate him. He is off scot-free. If there's a much more nuanced takeaway, if there's a lot more criticism in it, if they've got more details, more facts about potentially obstruction of justice in it, that does change the perceptions. But I don't know that anything can really cement around it, Richard, until we see the final report.
And finally, Rick, I'm going to start asking this every week. What is the story that we didn't cover enough? With all the fire hose of all the craziness, whether it was the 25 people who shouldn't have gotten clearances, reportedly who did, or whatever, what story do you think in a normal world, which I know we don't live in anymore, would have been, you know, front page headlines for days that now is an afterthought this week?
I think the security breach at Mar-A-Lago is a massive story potentially, because it sets up this unique circumstance where the president goes to his private business. There's all of these overlapping security officials, and the ease with which this woman, for whatever reason, was able to get into the compound with multiple cell phones, multiple passports, and we're told some software that included malware. What her intentions were, I think, could potentially be an enormous part of the story, but even more broadly, what it says about the security bubble or lack thereof around the president.
Rick, as always, I certainly appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard.
Coming up next, a look at the numbers. We're going to give you a snapshot of where voters today stand on President Trump, the Mueller report, and the 2020 race. We'll have that after this.